Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for tuning in to the newest episode of One Missing, One Murdered, All Indigenous, which is a true crime podcast dedicated to true crime involving Indigenous people. I'm your host, Jordan Lombear, and I want to take this time to say thank you so much for all my patient listeners that really got on the bandwagon and really helped me go forward when it came to this startup of this podcast. I know that my scheduling and releasing all of these episodes has been very spotty. 2020 and everything else kind of really set me back with a lot of stuff. A lot of life changes have happened, but I'm back and I'm very excited to bring you so much new content that I have lined up, and to just say thank you so much for everybody. And I hope that everybody out there is staying safe with the COVID-19, especially with the Delta variant that's going on out there. I hope everybody is out there practicing social distancing and really just focusing on keeping yourself healthy, keeping everyone around you, your loved ones, safe and healthy. And again, I just want to say a big thank you so much to everybody that has just waited patiently, that subscribed, that shared all of the podcast information. Just an update. We did get a new Instagram. So if you want, go check that out. It's in the all links and I'll post it in the show notes and everything else. But again, I just want to say thank you so much to everybody that has really been asking for more. I've gotten some feedback about coming back on, and like I said, it's just everything that my life has just kind of been so hectic and crazy, but I'm back, and like I said, I'm really excited to bring you guys today's episode, which was actually recorded back in April of 2021, which is this year that I'm releasing. And just a lot of stuff happened and I wasn't able to get to it, but I was able to get it all edited up and put together for you guys today, so that way you guys can hear exactly what's going on with the Justice for Native Women website, which no spoilers or anything, but they're rebranding, and they're rebranded to Justice for Native People. And I want to jump into the interview to help let Mac really tell you all about how he's really journeyed through from the origins and to where he's at now with the show. So with that being said, again, a big thank you so much to everybody that's tuned in, and great big shout out to everybody that has helped me along the way to help get me get me back off the ground, the new logos, the new songs and stuff like that. Once again, just thank you all, and may the Creator bless you all. And I hope that you guys all enjoyed the latest episode of One Missing, One Murdered, All Indigenous, today with Mac, who runs Justice for Native People. So I'm joined today by Mac, who is the creator of Justice for Native Women. Mac started, we've talked last time about the Justice for Native Women page. Just recently, though, Mac, you've actually changed the direction of Justice for Native Women. I guess I know he's going to banter a little bit before that, but I mean, it's the hot topic of the day. So what inspired you to make this change in this new direction?
Well, basically, seeing a lot of the work that some of my colleagues are doing on social media like Facebook and whatnot, and kind of observing as I was making the master list for missing or Indigenous women, I'm observing all the stuff that's going on with men in the same communities and how it's getting even less attention than the women who are missing from our communities. And so I wanted to draw more attention to that, because I think we're all kind of moving away from gendering certain issues in the community, and I think that's a positive direction to go in, because that's the question that I've been asked for many years is, well, why just Native women? What about the Native men? So,
And when I first started the podcast too, I really wanted to highlight the fact that it's not just Native women, and it's not that I'm trying to push them aside or whatever or anything like that. It was just that there are just as many Native men and children too that are going missing, and they're not really being talked about as much. I know that the MMIW movement has really highlighted the women aspect, but I wanted to make it so that way it was more open, like you're saying too.
Well, and quite frankly, I think part of the reason why it started in that direction, is because a lot of our cultures have that sacred femininity in our traditions, but also I think we knew that dominant culture would be more open to the issue from the female point of view than they would be from the male.
So do you think that the Justice for Native Women has kind of opened the doors to the even bigger issue of Indigenous people missing?
Well, I don't want to take credit for anything because, like I said, I've been observing the work of a lot of people who are in the same communities as me. Like Lost and Missing in Indian Country has been documenting missing and murdered Indigenous men for a long time. I think that what I'm hoping to provide that's different is that I have these master lists that I've been creating that are just open source information for people to look at and see names and dates and places where this happened, rather than just like, this just general feeling that this is happening. We have like hard data, and it's been used by like the University of Arizona and the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Task Force in Minnesota and lots of other places. And so I'm hoping to provide that information from the male perspective too.
Right. And I think that that's really important too. And like I said, I think the bigger picture is just justice for Native people or Indigenous people in general.
Yes.
So you recently put out an article on your webpage, which is justicefornativewomen.com, highlighting this. And just like I said, it's what prompted me to give you a call because, like you said, you've been putting together this master list. And I encourage everybody to come check out this website because there are just thousands of cases that, these flip cards you can go through. There's pictures, names, dates, information. And this website is actually a huge piece of my resources as well. Like you said, you're trying to highlight Indigenous men as well too. So I know that it's been a challenge just even recently with when we're talking about, Indigenous people and gender. And one thing I didn't highlight last time or didn't really talk too much about is the transgender community. Now, you yourself are a two-spirited individual, correct?
Correct, yes. I am, or in dominant culture, they would call me trans, female to male.
Now, when we're talking about these cases, how much of that have you really seen a lot of that when you're doing a lot of these researches?
I have seen transgender individuals, and I've done a lot of work with those who are doing work in the research community to identify them correctly, because the understanding of transgender folks is kind of evolving, and you've got to be how do you say, like,
is it open-minded?
Yeah, you have to be open-minded. You have to patient. There you go. You have to be patient with people because their understanding of transgender folks is evolving. They don't know a lot of people like me, probably. And so I've had to kind of, with a gentle hand, tell people no, just because they were born male, like if they were identifying female when they died, then they're an Indigenous woman. So making sure that people are on the right lists and are being referred to in a respectful way. I gotta, like,
that just kind of prompted my brain a little bit about, you said that, identifying, as a male or female, I can't help but wonder how many of cases have been misclassified, when it comes to, any kind of case involving, discovering somebody that's deceased, you go to, your born identity, your born sex or whatever. And just like I said, this is just kind of a brain fart on my end, but I mean, it just made me really think about, like, I wonder how many cases have been mishandled or mismanaged in that way because of gender fluidity, because gender fluidity's been around for a long time anyway.
Right.
So there's
an indigenous cultural precedence for having more than one gender. There's lots of different representations across different tribes. So we actually had words in some of these languages like two-spirit for people who didn't identify on the binary. So it's a very old concept that we had taken away from us by assimilation and boarding school and all that kind of stuff.
Right. That seems to be kind of what history has taught us, in that there is these rules, not just with gender identification, but with traditions, and with our beliefs and our presentation of, like you said, it has a lot to do with assimilation.
I have had some cases where I've been trying to classify a person as one or the other, and it's been hard to determine if they were transgender or not. Like if they identified one way and then had different body chemistry, but it's really hard to tell sometimes. Or sometimes sometimes they'll just blatantly call them the wrong pronouns in the way that they have them listed. And that's really triggering for a lot of folks from their community, or like every time they're talked about in the media, it's always mentioned, even though it's not really relevant, except for maybe for people who are testing DNA and things like that. But, you know, if you're looking for a person, you're looking for them. You're not going to be checking out their pelvis bones or anything like that.
Right. So another thing that I really wanted to ask you about, too, was that along with all this crazy stuff that's happened in the last, I mean, I can't imagine we want to talk about 2020 as a whole.
No, but it's been quite a year, especially being from Minnesota. It's still kind of ongoing with the current Chauvin trial stuff.
Right. Well, one of the things that did come out of 2020 was a sort of resurgence or a big surge in the missing children. And I know that once that had happened, I tried to aim a lot of my content toward that. But I mean, again, that's also another kind of area that's a little hard to find on information, or is quite honestly really hard to report on.
There's a lot of misinformation.
Yeah, I was going to say, can I get your perspective on that when it comes to the Indigenous community as far as missing children goes?
Well, monitoring, I haven't been monitoring it as closely over the last year because 2020 was difficult for me too. Since the beginning of 2021, I've gotten back into the groove of trying to keep track of new and emerging cases. And honestly, from my perspective, I haven't seen like a huge uptick in the cases themselves as much as the awareness of them. Mm-hmm. And I think it's because there's a lot of these like misinformed but well-meaning underground groups who are trying to do things about missing children and sex trafficking and things like that without very much information and with a lot of conspiracy theories. But there's a lot of misinformation about the trends around sex trafficking and around missing children. But I think it's just that people are at home and they're paying more attention to social media. They're paying more attention to the news and the community around them. But I also think that there is a bit of an uptick because children have also been home for a long time. They're also engaging more with the internet, which is where trafficking tends to start.
Of course, April is actually National Child Abuse Prevention Month. Like you said, that this whole COVID pandemic, I can't imagine what it's like for children that are in a position, you know, like you said, we have been quarantined, we have been staying indoors, and I think that it leaves a lot of our children kind of in a position to where they're actually being abused in the moment as well. Like it keeps them indoors with their captors and stuff like that. So I mean, I heard, I was reading an article somewhere that said that, you know, like you said, that they're thinking that it could, but I mean, I don't want to speculate too much there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
I just think that our people have a lot of vulnerabilities, and it's just certain vulnerabilities are more apparent now that we're all looking at it. And being on the internet is a big part of that. Being in foster care is a big part of that. Basically, being in a position where you want something and somebody can exploit that desire.
Right. Talking about a lot of these cases, I mean, the one case that just there's been one case that kind of really put me at a standstill. It was a case that just completely stopped me dead in my tracks because it was heartbreaking. I mean, people can say what they want about it, but it's hard to do these cases, especially involving children and having children of your own.
Right.
When the details on some of these cases are completely grotesque. And the Brittany Locklear story, that was a case where, I mean, I had read it. You know, I read the articles. I'd kind of, you know, perused everything. So it wasn't, you know, I'm used to that. I'm used to reading everything that I need to. But when I started to put it down, I completely stopped and I cried because that moved me. I mean, Brittany was 5 years old and I have a 5-year-old now. Granted, he's a boy. It doesn't, but it still resonated with me. And like I said, that's been the big challenge for me when it comes to doing these cases. And I can't imagine it's any easier for you.
I would say that I have the ability to kind of distance myself because one of my former professions was that I was a child protection investigator. and I used to do like forensic interviews with kids, you know, the kind where they have like the cameras and the dolls, and you ask them where they touched the doll and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So I have built a lot of skills when it comes to self-care, when it comes to compartmentalizing things. I'm in therapy, like, you know, I'm doing a lot of work on my end to try to stay sane and to be careful with myself too. But so I would encourage you to do that as well. Like when I have needed to step away, and there have been times like last year, I just do it. Like
Hmm.
you're not good to somebody. You're not good to anybody if you're not good to yourself. So
I appreciate that, and I did. It took me a long while to pick up everything again. Like I said, especially with last year, with everything
yeah.
that was going on at the time, you know, it was a lot that was happening. So, but like I said, I appreciate that. So one of the things that we didn't cover last time that you and I got a chance to talk was, you actually have a section on your website, labeled, you know, frequently asked questions. And
Mhm.
I was wanting to know if you probably want to go through a few of them and answer. Like you said, it's been a while since you started. I mean, you started this entire website back in 2015.
Yes. Yep.
So that's been 6 years.
Yeah, and I would say that I've occasionally gone through them and like just made sure that they're up to date, but it's
So,
been a while.
I can imagine, like we're just trying to keep the upkeep on this. So, but we'll go through a few of these frequently asked questions and however many we can answer. So one of the questions is, what if I have information in regards to a case that I would like to add to a profile?
Sometimes I have family members reach out to me and say, you know, because I basically, my information is from local news sources or social media, and so a lot of it is incomplete. One of the things that is typically missing is a person's tribal affiliation. So
Hmm.
sometimes I have family members or people from the community contact me and say, hey, I know what this person's tribal affiliation is, or I know more about their physicality. I know more about them, basically, that you could add to this for people to look at. And so I just ask people to reach out to me and, you know, be patient because, again, this is sort of like my side project. I still have kids and work and other things going on, but
Hmm.
I'm happy to add any more information because there really is no centralized place for all this information. So I understand that a lot of it's going to be word of mouth and community led. So I try also though to put like that it's an unconfirmed source because literally anybody can email me and say, hey, I'm so and so's cousin and this is what I know. And I want to add that information if it's relevant, but
Hmm.
I just want people to know the realistic story about how it came about to be there.
So a question that leads me to ask you is, like you said, you use your information that you gather is at a lot of just news stories and news blogs and word of mouth and personal accounts.
Hmm.
Have you ever tried to reach out and obtain any sort of police files or some sort of official documentation?
No, I know there are other organizations like Sovereign Body Institute. I know that they do more of that. They've dug a lot of police records up, and I've actually looked at some of their information requests online too. But it costs money basically to do requests for information, and I just don't. I'm doing this all on a volunteer basis, so I don't have the funds to ask for that.
Yeah, that was something that Janet Franson, who runs Lost in Indian Country, she was giving me a little bit of tips here and there to try to request documentation and stuff like that to be a lot more thorough. But like you said, I think that what this side of the business, or I wouldn't even say business, this side of reporting is, it's a non-profit. It's out of the kindness of our own hearts and our
Yeah.
passions.
Yeah, and I would be happy to at some point have this be like my main focus or something that I'm doing full time, but just right now, there's only so much time and money I can unfortunately pour into it.
Right. So another question is, what if I want a profile of my friend or family member taken off of the blog?
Well, I have had some family members reach out to me and say everything that you've written here is incorrect, or I've had some people reach out to me and say, hey, I didn't know what happened to my mother. And when I searched her name, your website came up, and that was really triggering for me, and it was really triggering for other people in the family, and so we just like it to not be there. and I've been more than happy to remove it because I don't want to cause any more pain for family members than they already experience. And I've had people reach out and say, hey, this person isn't actually like Indigenous in the way that you think, or we wouldn't consider them to be Indigenous. So if you could remove them, I'm happy to make those changes for people.
Another question is, you added a photo to a profile, but the source agency didn't have a picture with their profile. Where did you get it from?
Well, I get a lot of my pictures from social media. So like say, if you look at the Montana missing website, they may not have a photo available for people, but perhaps on postings on social media or even on the person's own private social media, they have like public photos and things like that. I try not to link it because I don't want people to go harass them or, look into their personal information and stuff like that. But I know that law enforcement has certain requirements. Like when I used to work with law enforcement, we did some missing person work, especially with youth, and they had to be careful about what pictures they chose, especially from social media, because they didn't want to give the impression to the child that they were watching their social media to figure out where they were. So they couldn't just go to Facebook and use their profile picture like I can. So I don't have to take those certain things into consideration because it doesn't matter if I'm looking. But I have had kids reach out to me and say, what the hell am I doing on your website? Take me down. And I'm like, I can't because you're not home yet.
Oh, wow.
I've had that happen a couple of times. So, and I've given tips to NECMEC and stuff like that when they've reached out to me.
Wow, that's kind of an interesting, way of being like, hey, I'm not really missing. Please take my picture down. But it's like, you're reported as missing. So.
You're 13, honey. It's staying up. Yeah. But that's why I think I have a section in the FAQ about that, where the only time I will take something down is if a family member is really adamant that this is something that hurts them and that they don't want there, cool, I'll take it down. But usually I have to see something from the organization, again, let's say the Montana Missing Persons folks, I need to see that entry taken down, or I need to see it reported that they were found when it's a youth.
And there are several of your profiles that you have up that you do give updates, and you do obviously try your best to try to keep up to date with everything, because there's been a few cases where I start looking into it and then I get down to the bottom and it's like, oh, this, they've been found, just an update. I'm like, oh, thank God,
Yes. Yeah. A lot of the time, especially with youth, if I have their profile up on my website and they get found, I'll just take it down because I know a lot of people don't want that old information about them out there, and that makes sense. So I try to respect their privacy, and I do that with adults as well. So if they went missing and they were found, I try to take them off. If they were missing and they were found deceased, just kind of depends on what the circumstances were, whether or not it's considered a mysterious death or a homicide or whatever. But if it's no longer relevant to the list, I try to take it down to preserve people's privacy as much as I can.
Mm-hmm. Like you said, it sounds to me like it's a case by case basis, and you treat it as such.
Yeah, I want to do as little broad brushing on this topic as I can, because I feel like that's where the problems come in, is trying to categorize everything.
Absolutely. Now, there's a couple of questions on here, like why the interest in Native women specifically, and surely violence in Indian country affects male-identified victims as well. Why don't you cover them? And I think that, like you said at the top of the interview, that your new direction is aimed at everybody. It's inclusive to everybody. So I think that, like you said, this is a little outdated, but I mean, I think you've done an amazing job, really broadening the search.
Yep, I'm just trying to,
for justice, period.
In my work, in my day-to-day work as a sexual assault advocate, I work with a lot of different people from a lot of different communities and genders, and that issue is also presented most of the time as a female gendered issue, but it really affects everybody. And the more we talk about how it affects everybody, the more everybody will be safe.
So another question that says, and I think that we've kind of answered that already, but I mean, I guess we can kind of widen it a little bit. Why do you include tribal information in each profile?
Well, there's a community lens that I look through where it's kind of calling out that community and saying, hey, this is happening in your community, to hopefully start conversation and also encourage people who have and pressure people who have information in that community to come forward with it. But it's mostly to like acknowledge the individuality of that person, because I think that's kind of lost a lot, is like we have this pan-Indian look, this pan-Indian lens that a lot of non-Indigenous people look through, where like we see ourselves as individuals from individual tribes, and we would identify ourselves as being from that tribe and not just Indigenous. And so I try to honor the entirety of the person.
Well, I think that highlighting a person's individual tribe, I think that that is also a sign of respect. It's what I try to aim for whenever I do report on Indigenous cases. That's one of my main criteria that I try to highlight, because I mean, it is a different community. It is a different tribe. To us, that means a lot. If you're from the Navajo Nation or the Cheyenne reservations, or the Sioux, the Oglala Sioux, or the Lakota Sioux, or like here we have the Utes, the Northern Utes, the Southern Utes, the Ute Mountain Utes. I mean, Paiutes, Goshute, whatever tribe you're from. I think that it really does highlight a part of your personality, because I know that taking pride in your tribe and your nationality, it's a big deal in the Indigenous community. And like you said, I don't want to put it in a negative way, but I think that people that are non-tribal, don't really understand it that much. But, they're to the open-minded people, they understand.
Well, and the difference between each tribe is so vast. Like, you have differences in language and culture, but you also have differences in like the landscape of struggle. Like, you have some tribes who have businesses or have casinos. You have other tribes who have nothing. You have some tribes who have electricity and running water, and you have others that don't. And so it's just a very different lens for each and every tribe. So I just think it's good to acknowledge that, and also kind of put out there to people who are non-Indigenous, like, hey, this is a difference that matters to us and should matter to you as well.
I kind of want to sidebar a little bit, because as I've gone talking about the podcast and talking about the product, one of the conversations that I've had with a lot of people is the Indigenous experience, if you will, the lifestyle that we live. And a lot of the non-tribal members are very, I've come across both, I've come across both closed-minded and, open-minded. The tribe that I'm from here is a very fortunate one. I'll put it in that lens. They're very fortunate. They have, there's not a lot of wants and, needs and stuff like that. Everything that they're just very fortunate. I'll put it that way. And as I've been doing this, one of my aunts made a comment that's good, because, about what I do and the direction that we're taking, the things that we're highlighting. And we don't really know a lot of that. We don't know a lot of missing people in our community or murdered people. And I think that that's a real fortunate thing for us. But like you said, there is different landscapes. There is different, communities that this is all too familiar for them. And one of the things that, like I said, talking to the non-Indigenous people around here, it really takes them by surprise that, yeah, there are people out there that live in homes that don't have running water, or are from a household or a community that is very poverty stricken. And it's a little hard for them to understand and wrap their head around a concept that there is a sort of third world country style of living in this country. And one of the conversations that we did have was what you and I talked about last time, was trying to survive the conditions and the situations that a lot of Indigenous people face. And I don't know, have you come across that at all?
Could you reframe the question for me? I'm not
So
sure
I
I
guess what
understand.
no, I was going to add, I kind of just threw it out there, but have you ever come across non-tribal members or non-Indigenous people that are either ignorant about it or very surprised? I don't know. This is kind of
Oh
just me off the
yeah.
record, just asking.
Oh yeah. No, like part of what I do in my day job is I actually train sexual assault advocates, and part of that is training them to work with Indigenous people because we have a pretty large well, not there is no Indigenous population that's large, but a fairly large population here.
Well, I
Because
don't
we're
know.
kind
The
of in
Navajo
between.
Nation could give us a good run
True.
for our money.
True, my bad. Okay, so up here we're
Shout
in
out
like
to the Navajo Nation.
what up? What up, Danae? So up here we are like in between a bunch of different reservations, and so I do that piece of education with them. And one of the things that always surprises people is like, what, boarding schools happened? They have no idea about the boarding schools. They have no idea about a lot of the different policies that I talk about, like allotment and termination and a lot of our history. And then I also have a section of the training where I put up a picture of like the 8 or 9 different missing or murdered Indigenous people that I know of for like the last 20 or so years, and they're just looking at it like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know this was, like I heard about it, but I didn't know this was something that is already so prevalent. And like I point to the pictures and I'm like, I was this person's social worker and this person's social worker and I was this person's cousin's foster parent, and like I was affected just as one individual person by several of these deaths and missing people. So like imagine how it affects the community at large.
And I love the term generational trauma, but I think that the term that trauma affects an entire community, especially when it's a tribe mentality, if you will,
Yes.
where if one of us goes missing or if one of us is murdered, it affects the entire community. It's a trauma to the community itself, and I think that is something that's not fully understood. Of course, you know, communities, whenever they have anything happen to them impactful like that, it does affect them.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I think that the Indigenous community is, because they're so tight knit and so tight, you know, so closely bonded to each other, that anytime something happens to one of our own, we're automatically, boom, it affects us all, and it hurts. It hurts. It doesn't matter who it was, or, you know, if you did know them, didn't know them, liked them, didn't like them.
Right.
You have this sense of, oh my God, that happened to one of our own, you know, and I think that's a big thing.
Well, I think it's something that like African American folks can relate to, where you look at it and you see, hey, that's somebody that looks like me. That's somebody who has the same last name as my cousin. Like that's somebody who could easily, very easily be me in the wrong circumstances. So I think that's really scary. And like when people have been murdered in our community, we've had like group mourning things, mourning get-togethers. We have like support groups in the schools, because a lot of the time when one person gets murdered or goes missing, then you've got other people who are, you know, so affected negatively by everything going on around them that they start to consider suicide or harming themselves. And so sometimes we do have like a chain reaction in the community where you have one person get murdered and then somebody commits suicide over it, and then one of their friends commits suicide. And so we try to do a lot of work to prevent that from happening, because suicide is another large cause of death in the Indigenous community.
Let's take a second to really talk about that, because I can't remember if we talked about it on the last time we were talking, but at around that time that you and I did our first conversation, there was sort of it's hard to explain, really. It's hard to explain that mentality of suicide and what it really does. I myself have I'm sorry. I've had my moments of depression, and I've had my fair share of run-ins with suicide.
Mm-hmm.
I don't generally like to talk about details. I don't generally like to really, it's been recently that I've really started moving in that direction to kind of raise awareness, especially amongst the Indigenous community, but even just everybody, people in general, that suicide is prevalent. It doesn't
Right.
matter in whether you're a kid, an adult, an older person. It's a huge thing. and there was a few years back that it had hit my tribe that I'm enrolled with out there in Toyok, that they had sort of an uprise in teenage suicide, and I can't imagine what that was like to have one right after another. And I want to say there was at least 2 or 3, and then a couple that had attempted as well. So I mean, it's real.
Yep.
I mean, it's real.
Well, and a big part of the problem that I think even we don't realize a lot of the time is that a lot of these mental health things like post-traumatic stress disorder and anxiety, depression, these are all newer concepts for our people. Like, we didn't have a lot of the same traumas or historical traumas pre-contact. And so we don't have like a lot of the cultural structures or language around how to describe these conditions and how to treat them, because for many years we didn't have them. And then by the time we started getting them, like, we didn't have that same cultural community cohesion to talk about it. And so we're still kind of working that out in current day.
And it's important to really stress too that no matter what situation you're in, that, I know I'm going to kind of go into PSA mode, but it's not the answer. If you're listening to this and you're in a place like that, just know that that's not really the answer. You know.
Well, know that there are many people who either have felt or do feel the same way that you do, and that you can relate to other people. I think it's especially hard for men and Indigenous men to reach out for help too, because we tell men that you're supposed to be independent, you're supposed to be brave and aggressive, and you're not supposed to have feelings, or it's okay to numb those feelings with alcohol and addiction rather than talk about them. You know, the toxic masculinity that a lot of men internalize. So.
Okay, that took me a different place. So another question that is put on there is, and I think we've answered this already, but I don't know if you want to answer it, is what is the purpose of your blog?
Okay. Well, I would say that the purpose is to document what's going on in our communities, to put a face and name to the people it's happening to gather more information about the circumstances surrounding when they disappeared or when they died, because I think that gives kind of a window into the circumstances and vulnerabilities that could make anybody vulnerable to that situation. And just kind of talking about the people that are affected and the families and the communities, and making it more about our stories, where, like, I would say in dominant culture, they do a lot of stuff around just like collecting data, and data is good. I love data, but I think that it's more traditional for us to tell the story of what happened, and to have kind of that more verbal history about it than just like a name and a date and a place.
I think that in the Indigenous community that we believe, and my mom's brother said it this way. He said that when you stop talking about somebody, that they disappear, but the second that you start to talk about them again, they have a way of reappearing in your life. And I think that's something that I've always held to be true. It's one of those things where it's like, oh, hey, I haven't thought about so-and-so for a little bit. And then you see them at the grocery store. You know?
Yeah.
But I think that same belief applies in general, that if we continue to talk, if we continue to tell these stories about these people and not let them be forgotten, I think that in some way that keeps them around and at the forefront, and hopefully it brings them home. And I think that kind of encompasses, like you said, the telling their story. That's something that I resonate with, because that's the whole point and purpose of my show, is to tell these stories. You know, tell these, because, you know, they're not just pictures. They're not just, missing Indians. You know, they're people. And at the end of the day, they're people. No matter who or what, where they come from, they're people. And like you said, I think that's the purpose overall in general. So we've kind of already touched on this question too, but I mean, if you want to go through it one more time, it's in what ways do you profit from your work on justice for Native women?
I don't really. I've done, I think, one training for law enforcement a couple years ago that I got paid to do. Otherwise, everything that I've done has been volunteer. So I don't run any ads. I don't have any sponsors. I don't have like any kind of grants or anything behind me. So I'm not making any money, any living off of it at all. Because I think, rightfully so, people don't want tragedy that happened to their family to be monetized and like somebody to be a ghoul just like making money off of the tragedies of their community, and I don't want to be that either. So I've tried my best to keep money out of the situation.
I know that when I started doing this, I know that there was the thought of basically my best friend and I are trying to start our own podcast or whatever. But he's got this grandiose idea that, like, oh, we're going to become rich. I told him, I was like, bottom line, nobody gets rich from podcasting, period.
Yeah, for real. Like, there's Joe Rogan and that's it. Well, like, if there was an opportunity in the future to fund my research or fund a way to, like, better support my research and, like, keep a cleaner, easier to use database, that kind of thing, like something to improve the quality of the work that I'm doing and make the information more accessible to people, that would be different because I feel like that's improving the cause and giving me the ability to work and focus on it more. But like, I don't want to, I'm always really wary of like putting my face on things and stuff like that, especially because I identify as male now, and I feel like the last thing that women need is men speaking for them. So I figure that when they want me to speak for them, they'll let me know.
Right.
So I just kind of leave the information out there and let the information speak for itself.
I know I'm sort of a hypocrite in that way too, because like I really enjoy, I've gone away of trying to, like, I thought of like, I can monetize, and because I think that in a way that if I could find a way to dedicate myself full time to this, I would do it in a heartbeat. But unfortunately the only way to do that is to try to make profit where you can, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
And I go back and forth on that in different places, because, I wouldn't mind selling t-shirts and hats and stuff like that for the show at least. But like you said, is a lot of it would be just going back into funding this project and making it a full-time thing. But I mean,
right.
Like I said, I'm a little bit of a hypocrite that way.
Well, I think you can tell the difference between somebody who's doing it for their own glory, and somebody who's doing it for the cause. And I mean, I've had people reach out to me on Facebook and say, "Hey, I love what you're doing. Want some money?" And I'm like, "No, I don't really need any right now. Like, I don't know what it would even go towards. So no, thank you. But here's some organizations that could probably use it. Stuff like that." But
well, I know.
But I have that opportunity. Yeah. But I have that opportunity if I wanted to just like fleece people. But I'm not going to do that because it really matters to me. And I feel like I've always felt like since I started this project that if there was a way for it to pay for itself, that would be great. But I never really had any designs on like getting famous or becoming the lead spokesperson for anything. Like I just wanted to get the information out there.
And I think you've done a really good job with the website, and I can't help put you over enough because, like I said, your website is actually one of the cornerstones that, as far as my research goes, you're if not the first or second one that I'm right to. Once I get a case, boom, I'm pulling your website up. So,
thank you.
Another question that is asked is, what if I'd like to use your mosaic wall or profile for my site or event related to MMIW?
I've had like a lot of different organizations reach out to me and say that they want to make like a poster of the mosaic wall, which is like all of the photos on the main page when you enter. And I think that's great. Like the whole point of it was to be emotionally effective, that when you come to the website, it's not just links or a list of names, it's pictures. So you can see right off the bat, like these were people, and they're pictures of them in situations where they're like getting ready to go out or celebrating with their family or having a birthday. Like it could be your grandma, your auntie, it could be anybody. So I just, when people ask to use that stuff, I'm like, yeah, go for it, because it's not my pictures, it's not my information. I just gather it.
So another question that I think we've answered a lot of, if you really listen, but another question is who are you? Who are you? And what is your professional background? And I think that you've done a lot of explaining of who you are and really given an in-depth answer. But I mean, is there anything you'd like to add to anything that you feel like you've missed?
I don't think so. Like, I think, well, maybe some things. Like, I acknowledge the privileges that I have and that I'm willing to learn more about other communities and things that I don't already know about. I don't think that just because I've been doing this for 5 years that there's nothing for me to learn from other people. And so, like, if there's a way for me to do what I'm doing in a more culturally respectful way for their tribe, or their community, I'm happy to do it. And just that, like, I have been working within the Indigenous community since I was about 22 years old, and I'm 35 now. And like, this is something that I'm very committed to and feel on a personal level. But it's not just like a voyeuristic thing where I'm trying to aggrandize myself or profit off of the profit off of the pain and suffering of other people. So, like, if there's any way that I can learn to do what I'm doing better, that's what we always say in our languages, which is, I'm always seeking to learn the right ways of my people, and I don't know it yet. So I'm always learning.
That's awesome. Now, I didn't notice this on the last time that I checked your page, but it also says that you're part of the staff for Lost and Missing in Indian Country.
That needs to be updated. I don't know if they would still consider me staff there. When I first started the website, they were kind of getting off the ground too, and so we did a lot of information sharing. I was sending them a lot of profiles, and they were using a lot of information from my site to kind of, we were really feeding into each other to kind of get our work off the ground. But I would say that actually the gendered part of it kind of made us go our different ways, where Lost and Missing in Indian Country did a lot of work with both genders, and I was initially just focused on the female perspective. But now, who knows what could happen in the future, but I still have like a deep respect for Janet's work and everything that they're doing over there.
So you're what would it be, like a silent a silent partner?
A silent partner, maybe. I mean, they had my information and picture on the website at one point, but I wouldn't be offended if they took me off of there, because we just don't communicate as much as we used to. But yeah, like, I would say that we helped out each other out a lot in the early years.
I really want to stop for a second, and I want to acknowledge that I've already kind of said it already, but this month that we're recording this is April, which is, like you said, like I said earlier, is Child Abuse Prevention Month. What kind of tips would you like to put out there in regards to Child Abuse Prevention Month as somebody that's worked in the advocacy part of the law?
I would say that it sounds kind of corny, but honestly, one of the most effective things in these kids' lives is to have one adult that they can trust and turn to. And that sounds really easy, but it's a little more difficult in our communities, where we have a lot of like kids who are in foster care, or who come from communities that are impoverished or not really being as looked over by their parents as maybe people in dominant culture. They're parentified a lot earlier in life. So when these kids enter things like foster care, or they're poor, obviously, they don't have the same resources as everyone else. And so it's a lot easier for people with bad intentions to lure them into even worse situations. So, like, if you have a kid who doesn't have a trusted adult, and then another adult comes forward and says, hey, I'll treat you as mature and aged as you want me to. I'll give you all the things that you're looking for. I'll give you all the freedom and money and independence that you want. all those things are really attractive to somebody who has nothing. So
Hmm.
having that one person in their life that they can tell things without judgment or fear of retaliation, it really makes a huge difference.
Now, what are some tips that you would give somebody that is sort of on the outside looking into a situation where a child is being abused that you yourself know or have knowledge of? What sort of advice do you have for those individuals?
Well, in my opinion, like, I understand people's complex feelings around the system. But also when we have a kid in danger, like, that's probably the most primary concern. And I think a lot of people worry about, well, what do I do? Like, if I report this, does that automatically mean that somebody's getting removed from their house? Or, like, are people just going to ignore it? Or are they going to get mad at me because they think I'm just reporting dumb stuff? But that's their job. Their job is to determine what is a report worth doing something about and what is a report that they can just kind of, not ignore, but not necessarily act on because it's not that serious. Like, they don't expect the individual, the lay person, to know that. They just expect you to call if you can. So don't be worried about, like, whether or not it's a good report or something worth reporting. They have people whose jobs it is to determine that, and you won't get in trouble.
So what are some signs from your perspective, what are some signs of abuse that you would give out as far as tips would go for people to kind of look out for as far as, abused children or somebody that they suspect is being abused? What are some signs that people should look out for?
It's really hard for me to talk about that because it's such a broad subject. I think that the number one cause that I worked with for kids being removed from the home was neglect because of drug use. And so it's really just looking for those signs of neglect, like, are they going to school? Are they getting bathed? Are they eating well? Are they sleeping well? Because that's really how you can tell when a kid is being affected by a situation their parents are living through, is when it's kind of affecting their ability to take care of themselves. And or they have to take care of themselves at a very young age because no one else can do it.
That's kind of a hard thing too, because I know that there are, growing up in my Indigenous community, that there was quite a few kids that were forced into situations where they had to grow up at a very early age. Or you've got this mentality of, especially with women or girls, that have to grow up fast and be mom. And I know that. I've seen that. I've kind of lived a little bit of that in my walk of life. So that's not something that's very unique when it comes.
Well, and then
to
imagine you've got the system coming in and taking those kids out of the home and then telling that kid who's been parentified and has been acting as their own parent for several years, like, okay, we're taking away all your agency and we're telling you this is where you have to go and this is what you have to do and this is the program and the assessment and this is all the stuff you have to, and we don't care what you think. Like, of course they're gonna be trafficked, or they're gonna go to anybody who would give them anything better than that, and it's really not that hard.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And the bar is low, so.
I don't know if you want to give any comment on the Black Lives Matter.
I support, obviously, our African heritage community. I have a son that's part African heritage as well as Indigenous, and so it's very important to me that that police brutality is an issue that we deal with soon and should have been dealt with a long time ago. And one of the things that I'm noticing in my research as it's changing to include men is that there are a lot of police killings of Indigenous men.
What are some of the challenges when it comes to reporting Indigenous male cases?
Well, there are a lot of them that involve police violence or prior police contact, like prior to them missing or being murdered. They, like the day before I got out of jail, or I had some kind of altercation with police. And there's a lot of just straight up police killings. One of which from Minnesota in I want to say '04 involved an Indigenous guy and Derek Chauvin, who also took some time off after that happened. So, these are, if maybe he'd been stopped when that happened, we wouldn't have the whole George Floyd thing. But it's something that's really prevalent in our communities is police contact and then police deaths. Like I'm going on like 550 cases for Indigenous men so far, and about 80 of them are police involved, and that's pretty large swath, I would say. And then
Absolutely.
there's a lot of cases where it's stuff like men who are just doing survival things. So like, they go out for a walk, or they go out berry picking, or they go out hunting, and then they just never come back. That happens a lot.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to Indigenous males, there are certain ways of looking at it. It seems like there's no real middle ground. It seems like for Indigenous women, it's a lot of like, oh, they just went missing, or maybe they just ran off, or stuff like that. And then you've got the male perspective, or the male side, and it's like, oh, well, they were a troublemaker, or, you know, they really highlight to try to, and that's something that I don't really know how to put this, but when it comes to these Indigenous cases, I see this sort of airbrushing of bringing up their negative traits, or their negative history, or whatever, if you will. And that's frustrating even for me, just as an individual. It's like, what happened? Why aren't they just people? You know?
Yeah. Why are we constantly using their mug shots for their missing person posters? Are you going to tell me that nobody took a picture of them? I really doubt it. But that's what they do every time, or they mention their criminal history in the article, or gang activity or whatever. Like, it's not relevant to whether or not they're missing. Like, I don't know. Like, what they did 5 years ago as youths that really isn't relevant to why they're missing now, when they're a dad and they're in their mid-20s.
Right, because there's a stigma around males, like you said, that they bring up their criminal histories and stuff like that. And even when it comes to the women aspect, a lot of, and what we talked about last time, I keep seeing a lot of this is, oh, prostitution, drug use, prostitution. And it's like, we all have a past. I get that. And I get it. You know, you want to put all the facts out there, but I mean, it seems to me that they put it in an order that really is like, oh, well, you know, they were into prostitution, so maybe that's where, or they were into gang activities, or when they were 18, like you said, or 16, you know, they were involved in some sort of illegal activity. And it's like, I get that, you know, and we all have that past, but that's not relevant. Like you said, it's not relevant to where they're at today.
Well, and even if some of it is, like, the way that you frame it is really important. There's a huge difference between calling somebody a prostitute and saying that they engage in survival sex work. You know, there are people who do that, but when people think of a prostitute, they just think of, like, somebody who likes to have sex for money, like Pretty Woman or something like that. Like, it's a choice. Right. But most of the time it's survival sex, because they can't get either their drug of choice or just basic needs met without the money they get from sex work.
Something that I just recently had a conversation about this with a friend of mine, or a coworker, and we were talking about a lot of things, and that was one of the things that came up about prostitution when it comes to that. And it was kind of hard for me to explain it to him, or to put it in his way of thinking, that there are a lot of individuals, or that are put in a situation, like you said, survival. You have to survive your community, your surroundings. Sometimes, if, say, a 15-year-old girl needs a ride to school, and she gets a ride, but you get put in a position where it's like, okay, so what's in it for me, kind of thing.
And I've worked with young women who have slept with people to get rides to school. Not even lying.
Yeah, and that was something that I was telling, you know, the person I was talking to. He's like, well, they have a choice. There's always a choice. Not really. Not always.
Well, I mean, what's the choice? Hitchhike, or they, use money they don't have to get transportation they don't got, or not go to school and then have social services get involved because they're truant from school. Like, maybe there's choices, but they're not very good ones.
Right. I mean, like you said, it's either this or that, and sometimes
Yep.
that is better than this, or
Well, I think there's this cultural perception because in America, we have this individualized, that's our culture, is individualism. Is like everybody earns what they get in life. You work hard and you make money and you get prestige from that. But the reality is that sometimes bad things happen to good people and sometimes good things happen to bad people, and there's no reason for it. Like karmic justice isn't real. That's really the way that it works. Like, you could have a bad thing happen to you at any point without any say, without anything bringing it on. It just happens. Life is random that way.
I agree. So the last question that I want to ask you, and I think this is pretty relevant to help your site out, is how do I contact you or send any media inquiry, and how do I request changes or to removal of the profile? So basically, how do we get a hold of you if we want to know more information or we want to get our information out?
Yes. It is most effective if you reach out to me by email at sisterscythe, that's SCYTHE, @gmail.com. That's the email address that's connected to the website. I don't check it every single day because, like I said, I have other stuff going on, but I do my best to read my emails and make the changes that people request.
Awesome. Well, I just want to say thank you again for taking the time to, call me, and especially, like you said, this whole crazy world we're living in now. I mean, it's hard to find time to really, with the world getting semi back to normal.
Yeah,
I just want to say semi back to normal. But I really want to say thank you again, and thank you again for your website. Thank you for everything that you do, and I hope for nothing but success and good things to come your way.
All right. Thank you, and feel free to reach out again if you want to have another talk.
All right. Well, thank you again. We'll talk to you later.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
And that's going to do it for the latest episode of One Missing, One Murdered, All Indigenous. Once again, I want to give a great big shout out to Mac at Justice for Native People. In order to get to his website, you actually still have to go to Justice for Native women, but they do have a new Facebook up. He has rebranded it Justice for Native People, which I will put out in the show notes as well, so that way you guys can get and go check him out. Go check out the website. And who knows, you might know something. You might be able to help bring some clarity or closure to a case that has been open for who knows how long. So again, thank you to Mac. I want to say thank you to all of my lovely supporters that have really come out and helped, show me some love and all of the support. It means so much. This is basically not a rebrand, but probably let's call it a new season. Maybe we'll do these in seasons. I haven't really decided quite yet, but I am excited to bring you guys all new content, some all new episodes, some all new cases that I've been working on behind the scenes, and I'm really excited to line those up for you, line up some interviews as well, and maybe we'll get a visit with some old friends, maybe some updates as well. Who knows? Who knows what can happen this season? So, but again, I just want to say thank you to everybody, and I hope that everybody out there is staying safe, keeping yourself, social distancing and practicing good, good COVID practices. I couldn't remember what they're called. But I hope everybody out there stays safe. And like I said, you can check us out on Facebook at One Missing, One Murdered, All Indigenous. You can check us out on Instagram at One Missing, One Murdered. Also on YouTube under True Indigenous Crime Pod. Or if you want to check us out on the YouTube, the channel's called True Indigenous Crime Pod. The episodes are One Missing, One Murdered, All Indigenous. Go check us out there. Show us some love. I'm working on getting us some more social media platforms like a website as well. So I just want to say thank you to everybody. I can't thank you all enough for your love and support throughout all of this. And I hope that we can continue to make more content, more memories, and we can cover more cases so that way we can keep these stories going, and we might just be able to help out where, you never know. You just might know something. So... But I just can't say thank you enough, guys. But I hope that you all stay safe. I hope you all have a blessed day. May the Creator watch over all of you. As we say in my native language, the way out. Thank you all. Have a good day.